In today's video tutorial, we are going to focus on how to define function in JavaScript. And before we move ahead, what is a function? So in JavaScript and so many other programming languages, function is a reusable code which you can write once and call or invoke it in so many places on your document. So to define a function in JavaScript, this is how to write the syntax. And the syntax should be written with function followed with name, parentheses, and now with curly brackets. Structure it like this, just as you see this one now. And then after you must have written the function, now in some cases you will have to call or invoke the function. And to invoke a function or to call a function in JavaScript, then the syntax is this, which is name, then followed with parentheses. And now at the back of the parentheses, you enclose it with semicolon. So this is the syntax of invoking or calling a JavaScript function. And just as you know, that function is like a box. So the name of the function and what it does is what you need to know so that you can use it anywhere you want it to perform such thing. And that is why they said a function is a reusable code, which you can write once and use in so many places. And now, as you have seen the syntax on how to write a function, including how to call a function. Now let's move ahead and define the function properly. So to define a function in JavaScript, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, is that you have to first of all write the function keyword, which we see here now on my screen as I have written it. And after that, you can now come up with the name of that function, which in this case, and for the sake of this tutorial, I am going to use the function to convert a Fahrenheit to Celsius. And for that, I'm going to give the name as Celsius. And now it should be followed up with parentheses. Then inside this parentheses, I'm going to pass a parameter to it, which is going to be f. Then now I come over to the back of the closing of the parentheses. And there I will come up with my curly bracket, which I'm going to structure like this, as you see here now. So here now, inside here is where you are going to write whatever thing you want the function to do is what you are going to write inside this curly bracket. And for this, for example, I'm going to say return, then make a space and come up with parentheses. And now inside this parentheses, I'm going to say 5 divided by 9. And now I come over to the back of the closing of the parentheses and make a space. Now come up with the asterisk sign, which stands as multiplication in JavaScript, and that is this. And with this, I make another space and come up with another parenthesis. And inside this second parenthesis, I am going to say f minus 32. And now I come over to the back of the closing of this particular parenthesis and then close it with semicolon. So now as it is here now, what I'm going to do is to come down here and declare a variable, which I'm going to call value. Then here in this value, I am going to assign the result of whatever code that I have written inside this function, which I will pass through this to Celsius function name. And that to Celsius function name is what I am going to assign to this value variable. So that is why if I come down here now, say to Celsius, and now come up with a parenthesis, which I'm going to pass an argument of 77, and then come down at the back of the parenthesis and enclose it with semicolon. And now what I'm going to do is to come down here under this variable and come up with a JavaScript code, which I'm going to say document.getElement by ID, and now followed with parentheses. And inside this parenthesis, I will come up with double quotes. Then in between these double quotes, I am supposed to pass an existing ID name of a paragraph. And for that, I am going to come up here now. Then I will come up with a paragraph which I'm going to give an ID of equals to demo. And now this demo ID name of this paragraph is what I am going to come down here and pass here in between these double quotes, just as you see. And now come over to the closing of this parenthesis here and write dot inner HTML equals to value, and make sure I enclose it with semicolon. So this means whatever the result is what I pass inside this function name. And the result of all this is what is going to display here in this JavaScript command that I wrote here. And it's going to display the results in place of this paragraph. So if I happen to go go ahead and save this right now. Then go back to my web page. And as you see here on my web page, this is what is going to display. So this means that you have written your first JavaScript function. So moving ahead, the second method on how to declare function in JavaScript is by making use of the function expression syntax. And to declare a JavaScript function using the function expression syntax is by first of all putting the function in a variable. So that means that I'm going to first of all come up with a variable keyword, which I'm going to give a name as my function, and now make a space and assign a value to it by using the equals to sign. Now make a space again and now start writing function, which I'm going to follow up with parentheses, and inside this parenthesis I'm going to give it a parameter of a comma b. Now I come over to the back of the closing of the parenthesis and come up with the curly bracket. Then inside this curly bracket, which you know that is the place where we are going to be writing all the JavaScript code that we are going to use for our function. So now inside here, I am going to say return, then followed by parentheses, and inside it I'm going to say a, make a space, and times b, and make sure you enclose it with semicolon at the back of the closing of the parenthesis, as you see here now. So now what I'm saying here is that a and the b I passed as a parameter, that the result should be returned where it will multiply a by b. And for this, then we are going to come down here now and pass an argument, which we are going to put in a variable by first saying let results equals to my function and followed with parentheses. And now inside this parenthesis, I'm going to say something like 10, 7, and make sure you enclose it also with semicolon. And with this now, I can now come down here and come up with a JavaScript code, which I'm going to say documents.getElement by ID, then followed with parentheses, and inside this parenthesis I'm going to pass an ID name of a paragraph, which is this paragraph here. The ID name is demo, so I'm going to come down here inside here and come up with double quotes, then pass the ID name, which is demo, and now come at the back of the closing of the parenthesis and say dot inner HTML space equals to, and now come up with a double quote, and now inside this double quote is where I'm going to come up with a sentence which we regard as a string in JavaScript and in so many other programming languages. So to write a string, you must have to enclose it with double quote. And for that, I'm going to say, for example, this is the total of this. And then now make a space in between the colon and the closing of the double quote, as you see here now. Then I'll come over to the back of the double quote and write plus. Now make a space again and then add the result, which is the name of that variable as you see here. I will now pass it here. And with this, I can now enclose it with semicolon. So as you see it here now, this means that I have declared a JavaScript function using the function expression syntax. Whereas you know that the first one is the normal way of declaring function in JavaScript, while the second one is the function expression method. So with this now, if I happen to save my document and go back to my web page, and as you can see here on my web page, that the total of that is 70. That is what the total of this result here is, because what I said here is 10 times 7. So this is what it means by making use of the function expression in JavaScript to declare a function. Secondly, another method we use in declaring function. For example, if I happen to now comment this particular one out and now come down here now to declare a function by making use of the function arrow syntax. And to do that, what I'm going to do is, like as you see that here in the function expression syntax, there are a lot of codes. So the benefit of making use of the arrow type function in JavaScript is because it helps you write a shorter code, which means that if I have to rewrite this particular function expression syntax in arrow function type, then it is not going to be with much code. So for that, to move ahead in declaring our function by making use of the arrow function syntax, then what is going to be is, here I'm going to start with my function, which means I have cut out the let keyword and now my function should be assigned with equals to. Then now I am going to come up with a parenthesis, of which inside the parenthesis I'm going to say something like a comma b, then come at the back of the closing of this parenthesis. I will now make a space and come up with equals to. Then in front of the equals to sign, without making a space, I will come up with the comparison arrow sign, which is this, and then now make a space and say a space times b, which I'm going to enclose with semicolon. And now as you see this now, this is the shorter way of writing this function we wrote up here. This one we used the syntax of the function expression to write here. You can see that it's a bit longer, but this one down here, the arrow function, is the shorter way of writing this function. So now, and with this, I can now come down here and say let result, that is declaring a variable. Then now in this variable I'm going to say equals to, that is to assign the total of what this function is to this variable. So here I'm going to say my function, which is going to be followed with parentheses, and inside this parenthesis I am going to pass the argument that I want this particular function to times, which is, if I happen to pass 10 comma 8 here now, it means that 10 is going to be times by 8, as I say here that a should be times by b. So with this, if I come at the back here now and then close this, then come down here and say document dot get elements by id, and then followed it up with parentheses, and inside this parenthesis I'm going to come up with double quotes. Then in between these double quotes I'm going to pass the id name of this paragraph here, this one here. So the id name is demo, so I'm going to pass the demo inside there, and now come at the back of this parenthesis and come up with dot inner html, and now make a space and come up with equals to. Then after that I make a space and now write double quotes, and as you know that in between these double quotes is where we are going to write the sentence that is going to display on our web page. So I'm going to say this is the total, for example, followed with colon. Then in between the colon and the double quotes I'm going to make a space, and now I come over to the back of the closing of the double quote and make another space. Now come up with plus, make a space, results, and enclose it with semicolon. So as you see, it is here now. It means that the total of what I assigned to this result variable has been passed to here, so that it will be displayed in the position of this demo on my web page. Okay, so as you see it now, if I happen to go ahead and save this document, then go back to my web page. So here, as you see, this is what the total is going to be, which means it's working perfectly. As it's 80 here now, if you come back to our text editor, 10 times 8 is 80. So that is it. So that is the total of this code. Okay, so as you see now that this one is a bit shorter than the function expression. Okay, so with this now, I have been able to teach you how to use the function expression to define a function in JavaScript, including how to use the arrow function syntax to define a function in JavaScript. So now moving ahead, there is one other thing I would want us to take a look at, and that is what we call the local and the global variable, which I know that in one of the upcoming videos we are going to elaborate more on that topic. But here now, let me enlighten you a bit so that whenever we are going to focus on that particular video, then it will be easier for you to understand it properly. So what is a global and a local variable? So in that, a global variable is a variable declared outside the function, while the local variable is a variable declared inside a function. So as it is now, if I happen to come up with a variable which I'm going to say, let's say for example, let street name, then is equals to double quotes Chinedu Avenue. So now as you see this function now, we declared a variable inside the function, and this variable you see inside this function is regarded as a local variable. So the variable can only be used inside this function, so that is why it is regarded as a local variable. If I happen to declare a variable here, so this variable you see I declared here is a global variable because it is not written inside the function syntax. So it can be accessed globally. But this one inside the function syntax is regarded as a local variable. Like I said, as we progress in this tutorial, we are going to also do a separate video that is focused on what is a global and local variable in JavaScript. And with this, that brings us to the end of this particular video today on how to declare a function in JavaScript. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next videos.